but we're dealing with human beings and not a Sims character or AI where you can modulate every little thing. You can try, you can say you try, but at the end of the day, it is a human being that you're dealing with that has emotions, a life setup, and different things that you might not be able to control, that you might think you're controlling, but at the end of the day, you might not be. You can try to guide it the best way you can, but like you're saying, it's so multifactorial that it's hard to be uncomfortable and realizing that some of these uncomfortable moments help you grow, and kind of inviting them in and learning from them. So when you take that approach, the uncomfortable moments aren't really uncomfortable anymore. Like I think we were talking about before, of being uncomfortable in front of camera, but understanding and peeling back the layers of what is developing from it, and being on camera and being able to connect and talk and learn and grow.
Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. Today we have Brandon.
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
It's all good. So we've kind of been speaking off cam, and I've kind of expressed how wild your life has been, and you kind of see that as normal, but I don't think it's normal. So if you just give us a little breakdown of what you've done and how you got here.
Yeah, it's a bit of a convoluted path, if you will. Some say it's wild. I might say convoluted. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so I'm an Oregonian through and through, but kind of have dotted the map since leaving Oregon in full time, I guess, in 2017-ish. But went to the University of Oregon for undergrad. I can't speak of that program there for human physiology high enough. Was a practice player for basketball there. And then I also did Olympic weightlifting while I was there. And that kind of curtailed into some post-grad stuff of trying to make an Olympic team. And so I was in the Olympic hopeful pipeline, per se, of trying to make an Olympic team in either bobsled or rugby or wherever they decided to stick transfer athletes. And then since those sports don't necessarily make money, still trying to develop a professional career doing something else that wasn't me being an athlete. So worked in some smaller clinics, both in Oregon, and then at the Adidas location, they have Exos. So it's a little bit of a blend of elite and then general population. So I was doing both of those things at the same time. And then moved to California to work at a biomechanics lab, working with different running gaits and jump metrics and what have you. And then went to the University of Arizona, worked at the University of Arizona for a while. And then a job opportunity opened up with the Indiana Pacers, and then spent, give or take, however you define it, of roughly 3 seasons with the Indiana Pacers, because the COVID year was thrown in there. So we lived in the bubble in Disney World for a bit. And then now I'm entering my 3rd season with the Washington Nationals. So wearing a lot of hats of strength and conditioning, sports science, biomechanics, what have you. And that's kind of the bridge version. But I wouldn't be where I'm at today if I didn't get to learn from a lot of great minds along the way, and picking up tidbits from here and there, and letting them imprint on me, and kind of having my own style and approach to developing athletes and humans from a holistic standpoint, and getting them to better interact with their environment that they're in. So a break of my recent life.
How was the process of coaching during COVID for you?
Well, initially it was really weird because the whole league shut down. And it was kind of a weird process of not knowing what to do. Initially, we got to stay in market or stay in your city, kind of mandate or order from the teams or the league. And then that didn't really hold on too long, and people just kind of scattered. So then we started to do training sessions on Zoom, and then trying to get equipment to players or set up stuff to be sent to them, either from team budget or them setting them their personal space up. And then as that kind of curtailed, there was news that there was going to be a bubble in Disney World, and so the ramping up for that, both the G League and the NBA, both played the season, the remainder of the season, or the entire season in the actual COVID bubble. You couldn't leave. They had masked up the whole time, tested daily. This was before the vaccine at the time, so
Oh,
it was a heightened security. We got there, had to quarantine in a Disney hotel room. And granted, the grand scheme of things, it was not that bad, but when you're going through it, it's kind of annoying. So there's
yeah.
different
I mean, that's
challenges for
good.
going through that time during COVID of training. So being high cognizant of all
Yeah,
the little things.
yeah. So take us back to your sporting career. You've mentioned that you did basketball, bobsled, um, rugby sevens. Like, how did that process? How did they all start for you?
Well, I've loved human movement, so I guess I tried to emulate a lot of movement growing up. Um, I won a state title in Olympic weightlifting, so that kind of sparked the interest of kind of
Um,
trying to continue a little of that. And then played a lot of high level basketball all growing up. And so that kind of continued at the U of O, trying to make nationals in weightlifting, and then contribute as a practice player in basketball. And then just the drive from those two things continued into maybe I could have a chance to try to make an Olympic Games in either winter or summer. And so I tried to
hmm.
pursue that to best of my ability at the time.
Yeah. So, what was the sort of process when you were at the sort of Olympic camps, and how did the trials and sort of switching around work for you?
Uh, well, no one does bobsled growing up, so they recruit unless your parents do it and have you live in Lake Placid or Park City or somewhere in Canada. Um, but so they recruit most of their athletes from other sports. So their shtick is that you probably don't know that you're a potential bobsled or skeleton athlete yet until after you're done with your first sport. So they recruit a lot of athletes out of other sports. And so I was trying to pursue that for a while. And then the next Olympic hopeful, like development pipeline, rugby sevens was also in there. And then a couple other sports as well, cycling and whatnot. But they asked me if I wanted to go try and develop for that. And so I was like, yeah, there's a little bit more thinking if you're just fast or not and can slide down the ice versus now you can
Hmm.
outthink someone, because rugby sevens is similar to running a fast break on basketball, so it's a little bit more dynamic. So I said yes, but if they asked me to do anything, ping pong, equestrian, archery, what have you, I would have gladly gone and tried to do it if that meant trying to get or the ability to get to an Olympic Games.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's like, it sounds so sick just being able to like bounce between sports and sort of try a little bit of everything. With the sports that you tried, what was like your best and favorite part about it?
Well, the thing about bouncing between sports, because there's at the root of a large amount of sports, there's a fundamental backing of athleticism. So a lot of that can transfer
Mm,
sport to sport, and you can see it in high level leagues, which players are playing predominantly off athleticism versus a mix of skill or purely skill or a mix of all three. And so the athleticism portion is not going to last forever. So players
mm,
that were athletic at one time figured out how to play the game. So the athleticism in a large respect gets you in the door. So that portion is fun to understand at the rudimentary level of the transfer of sports. So being good at just rudimentary movement. What was the second half of your question? Sorry.
and just essentially, like, what was your favorite part about being in these different sports?
I like competitiveness. I like that portion. So being
Mm.
able to compete and get better every day, and compete against either your competition that you're friends with and trying to kick their ass daily,
Mm.
and make each other better.
How important was strength and conditioning with these different
I
sports?
think is well for me is vital because I had to squeeze out every last ounce of potential I had. So strength and conditioning was necessary, and being the background I had, it made it a little bit easier for me to try to break down and compartmentalize different aspects of what would make me better and not waste my time on
Mm.
X, Y, and Z just because tradition says to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. So when did that love for strength and conditioning sort of start growing, and you made that switch between athlete and now wanting to pursue strength and conditioning?
Um, I think it's just been a love for the process of getting better. And strength and conditioning was a part of
Mm.
the holistic development. If I was an athlete, the holistic development of myself, but now as a um, on the other side, I can help develop athletes per se to try to reach their potential and whatever that may be. So I like that aspect of breaking down the components, nutrition, movement competencies, um, tendon issues, and potential long term
Mm.
rehabs, stuff like that. That I really enjoy of developing the human in a wide big picture lens.
Yeah. So like how does that movement that you've like spoke about, how did that sort of grow into you then like going on to your postgrad and sort of everything that you've done since then?
Um, he grew by like just continuing to refine and find new things that I didn't quite understand and trying to build on competencies or setbacks. So understanding
Mm.
where I lack knowledge or don't quite fully understand application of things, so that helps grow it because there's the curiosity or um, excitement of trying to figure out how certain principles can apply to different aspects of human movement.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you break down when you're watching like a sport that you're getting into? How do you break that down and how do you create these programs for
Yeah,
it?
so try to break it down into the greatest limiting factor for that individual. So what factor is setting them back, or what will be their greatest accelerating factor? So what makes them good at what they do? If you look at it from like an NBA lens or a baseball lens, joining a team and joining somebody that's at year 5 of them in the NBA. Well, something got them to the NBA that was already they're really good at. Same
Mm.
for if you're joining an MLB team and that athletes has already been there for a long time. Something already got them there. So let's figure out what that is, and you generally will know, uh, and break that even further down into parts of how we can either maintain this or progress this a little bit, and then find the other things that could be their most detrimental, weakest link factor that will affect the things that they're really good at. So somebody that's like a
Mm.
shooter in the NBA, well, they're going to be in the NBA a long time if they can be a good shooter. That's what got them there. That's what's probably going to keep them there. So how can we refine that one thing? Let's not spend time and waste excess amount of time making them an ISO dribble drive guy because that's not going to be them. You're just wasting time. You might get
Mm.
some residual benefits of conditioning out of it, but that's really not what your goal is. So try to find what their greatest limiting or accelerating factor is, and then be able to watch film and gather metrics of data that will help you make a better informed decision on that thing. Uh, and then
Yeah.
with that data too, don't be just collecting data for the sake of collecting data because it does it answer a question for you, or are you creating a new question? So
Yeah.
that makes
So what would be your advice on sort of why not to create these extra questions?
uh, because you want to answer the questions that you already have. So if there's a question that helps move the needle for you that you don't already have, then yeah, you can create a new question, but don't just create a question for the sake of creating a new question that doesn't solve a problem that you're facing with data at least,
Yeah.
or in strength conditioning as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that principle of don't fix what's not
Yeah.
broken.
But being able to answer some of the questions of whatever your team is facing or the individual in the sake of data or sports science collection.
Mm.
Don't just try to present a new question because another team down the road's doing it and it looks cool on social media or what have you. Being able to answer a question that you're directly facing that makes your player or your team better, that's focus on those things first.
Yeah. So have you seen an impact of these like new social media S&C posts and what your athletes are sort of coming in and speaking about?
I was actually talking about this the other day. I think it's kind of hard for maybe some coaches or practitioners coming up that may not have a filter or a lens for
Mm.
discerning bullshit. Uh,
I was going to say you're allowed to swear.
because it there's a lot of stuff out there that looks good, but if you don't have the lens of like this this is actually bullshit at the end. It looks good, sounds good. It's a little bit of pseudo intellectualism,
Mhm.
but there's enough big words thrown in there that somebody's going to believe it. And so has athlete credibility because so and so trained there. Um, and you see that a lot, especially in stuff that these guys have good marketing teams. And as long as it
Mhm.
sounds good, it can convince somebody if you throw enough word salad at the individual that may not know. So
There's a couple coaches that have been not
oh,
mentioned per
we
se in
can
this podcast, but have been
we can
hinted
mention them.
at.
Let's take
That
some
I'm just like, yeah.
shots. Contribute yourselves.
I I'm just new. I don't want to get cancelled yet.
Well, I'll if you want me to throw some people under the bus because I think they do this exactly what you're saying, I'll have that. Uh,
Mm. No, but
a
that
guy
is
in
one of the.
that state that you mentioned earlier in South Florida that's got a lot of fugazi and sells
I think I know who you're talking about as well.
yeah, there's a 3-letter alliteration for his business, and it's,
No, like 100%, and I think it's like
he called my
to me, I hate
team
it.
out when somebody got hurt, and when I was with the
Oh,
Pacers.
really?
So I don't think thinking you're reinventing the wheel or whatnot when you don't have skin in the game. That's real easy. That's the other thing.
Hundred
If we
percent.
want to take more understanding that the offseason guys don't always know what's going on during the season and love to claim the
Mm-hmm.
victories, but never want to wear the the setbacks. Um, and that's
Can you briefly talk
uh,
about what happened?
not quite knowing all the parameters that go into what's the greatest limiting factor. How do you deal with X, Y, and Z um, variables? Because the textbook says one thing, that's great, but you just have to adjust for all these variable change and be adaptable to a myriad of different types of variable change throughout a season in any sport.
Mm-hmm.
So
Like a lot of injuries happen non-contact, and it's something it or contact. Like you can't control
yeah,
those. That's the thing. You can never control. You can help create a sort of armor around it, but you can never
yeah,
stop them. So like these
they're
injuries are going
so
to happen, but it's just.
multifactorial, and there's so many factors into
Mm-hmm.
it. And in a vacuum, you can control all of them, but we're dealing with human beings and not a Sims character or AI where you can modulate every little thing. You can try and you can say you try, but at the end of the day, it is a human being that you're dealing with that has emotions, a life setup, and different things that you might not be able to control that you might think you're controlling,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, you might not be. You can try to guide it the best way you can,
100%.
but like you're saying, is uh, so multifactorial that it's hard to fully.
One of the, I think it was Coach Mark that said this, but he essentially said that an athlete, like if we look at an athlete's life and then we measure it by percentages, S&C is maybe 10% of that. And we need to sort of build enough sort of armor around for the 90% that they can
Yeah,
fuck up. So we're just a little limiting factor that can help, but at the end of the day, like we don't know if they go into it with their girlfriends, their moms and dads, You can't
Yeah,
control that.
especially at the collegiate level, because the pro level is a little bit different, because what you're describing is now you get to be around that individual a little bit, actually a significantly more amount than the collegiate level. So you can, if you do have a good enough rapport and relationship, which you hopefully do, start to influence and sway some of those decisions to build that armor
Mhm.
per se that you're saying, versus collegiate, depending on what sport you're working with, you might only see them for 50 minutes twice a week. So yeah, it is a small snippet of trying to implement change at the collegiate level versus other levels.
100%. How do you go about building these rapports and sort of create buy-in with your athletes?
Uh, I think the prior sport background for myself helped
Mm,
kind of get your foot in the door for in the in the greater terms of this. But actually caring about that individual, their likes, dislikes, what that makes them tick, is huge. Um, I think at some levels, especially the professional level, you got to be well versed in your ability to talk shit. Uh, really helps.
100%.
And I don't quite think that like certain doctorate, like physical therapy programs, understand the nuance of that in a team setting, or the just educational programs that are undergrad or masters, what
Mm,
have you, because getting that is a building rapport tactic or avenue of being able to talk shit and get shit talked back by them.
100%. There's
Actually give
this
care about
there's
them
this
as a human being, uh,
yep.
and not. I mean, obviously, everybody wants to win. We want to win every game. Our goal is to win a championship, and get each and every player to progress in their career. However, um, I'm more concerned with how they are as human beings,
Hmm.
because that
They're human
drives
beings
me
at
as
the end of
well.
the day. 100%. There's this story that, and like this is on talking shit to players. There was this player at UW who, like me and we weren't in the same rack as like he wasn't under my rack, but we were just sort of like in talking distance with each other. And like he's strong, like strong, and like he'd come up and was like, "Did you see that? Did you see that? That was like he can do chow his weight." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. My granny could do that, and she's dead." And he was just, "Oh, coach, that's fucked up." And I was like, "Come on."
That's,
But it's like it's 100% what you say. Like it's knowing what players you can talk shit to as
yeah, and that
well,
comes with
and like ones that
building a
you can.
relationship. Obviously, you're not going to come in day one and start. Now you
No.
skip steps in the relationship building process, and that is something that I guess people do. They come in and skip steps, and then try to do that from the
Mhm.
beginning. Um, so the important caveat with that is understanding that that is a built thing. The first,
Yeah, 100%. And that like you're exactly right. Like I would never just willingly talk shit with a player that I've never met in my life. Like I would push them, see where their boundaries are, but then once I knew where
yeah.
they are, then I'll go in, or like I'll take a step back and just let them do what they need. What's the mentality differences that you found between sort of all the different sports that you've sort of coached and played?
You mean like in terms of what the difference in like the NBA versus professional baseball, or?
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of these players want to win and be good at their sport, or have something that motivates them, money, lifestyle, what have you. So that's a big thing. I don't necessarily think there's like vast things that separate the two. There's a lot of cultural differences than per
Mm.
se mentality. Um, 'Cause
Can you speak about some of the
there's a lot
cultural
more
differences?
Latin or South American, Latin international players in baseball. And in basketball, a lot of the or international players are either from Europe or Africa. So that like cultural difference in terms what international players will be on your team is a little bit different, just because the cultural background of, say, the Dominican is different than Ghana. But at the end of the day, we're doing the same thing. We want to develop to win a championship, or develop to make it to the next level. So those principles of trying to work hard are still there, regardless of what country you're from. But those are two vastly different groups in terms of relative upbringing.
Yeah. So, like, how many different sort of culturally different aspects do you have to consider when building up these programs?
I mean, you kind of consider it, but I also don't necessarily consider changing it based on the fact that you were born in Venezuela versus born
Mm.
in Serbia. Um, if that makes sense, they're based on physical
Yeah.
traits of anthropometrics and the greatest limiting factor to that player and how they interact with their environment. So that's more so.
Have you seen much differences between like the coaching staff between different sports
Uh,
in terms of like how they conduct the programs and sort of built around the athletes?
in terms of like other sports as well at the collegiate level,
Just whatever you
in
want to
S&C or
speak on.
sport coaching.
Sport coaching, and then we'll go into S&C.
Um, well, at the collegiate level, it's very like the sport coach or the head coach definitely runs the program, and at least the places I've been at the pro level, it's a very integrated approach where everyone's obviously the head coach has the main say, but you're a more integrated system of doing things cohesively, rather than just kind of just being told, um, if
Mm.
that makes sense. And then there's a lot of silo and different types of environments at the collegiate level. I know one that's consistently had a bad rep and bad strategy or coaching philosophy in the last maybe for forever is gymnastics, and that is not an isolated
Mm.
problem to one university or school or program, because it seems to be pretty consistent across the board that um, the people that coach that at the coaching level have a very militaristic type approach, and
Mm.
it's coming to fruition now. But I definitely noticed it at some of the university levels of how that bled into their training as well into S&C. So sometimes kids are coming in
Yeah.
crying and cool. Now I can't do, or we can't make them better in this aspect because we have to treat the whole person, and this is going to be more detrimental today if we add more stress into the system than needed.
Mm.
So that's definitely an aspect I've noticed in differing levels of coaching.
What aspects do you see now changing about the gymnastics culture and how that's getting coached?
I don't quite know how much it's changing now in terms of, other than the news reports of some of the stuff that I had seen prior, and then stuff with USM Gymnastics or other or universities having athletes come out about different things of abusive
Mm.
conduct, or the way that they're being coached. I think there was a thing at the University of Utah, and some of the stuff we had at the U of A was interesting approach as well. I don't want to speak to the same what was happening in
Mm.
Utah, but it definitely wasn't a healthy, uh,
Favorable. Yeah.
symbiotic athlete coach. It was definitely coach driven, and that's another
Yeah.
dynamic you see at the collegiate level of it's very coach driven, and a lot of coaches can get away with saying whatever they want because the individual or athlete is either young or doesn't have enough power to speak back, and that's something you see drastically change at the
Mm.
professional level because everybody is a professional. Um, the player might not act like a professional, but then that's on their career. Their career can be
Yep.
over shortly if they don't take it seriously. Um, but you have to adjust your coaching style, or the coaches that can last at the professional level understand that it's a professional relationship. You have to drive the thing and find an avenue where you can't just cuss your way to the getting them to do
Mm,
what you want them to do. You have to find a strategy and method that is conducive to working together. That's going to elicit the both out of best of you.
100%. And I think as well is like, I know like at these top end environments, emotions does play a big factor into it. I know, I think it was last year. I th- if I'm not wrong, it was a Tennessee coach. Was it Tennessee? He had like an outburst at an athlete where he was yelling at his face, and some people don't realize that like how intense these moments are. Like how one slip up, I might be wrong. I don't think it was Tennessee. Like how one of these sort of slip ups during a performance might cost the whole game and like everything that they've worked for.
Yeah.
Like, but I also don't think it's right to scream and yell at an athlete's face
Yes.
because like that can can be
I
detrimental.
mean, I haven't been in worked in college football, so I know that's a prevalent thing, and so I can't really speak to that environment. But in other environments, there's better ways, and still being stern and getting your point across. Just being
Mm.
a better communicator, even when you're angry.
So
In
what's
football, Tom
the
Osborne notoriously isn't a yeller or something like that. Those players
mm.
definitely won a lot of games in the mid '90s at Nebraska. They're great. But
Nebraska's doing some wild stuff as well with
yeah,
volleyball just
those are
now.
cool stuff. And
Like I watched the story and I was like, damn. Um, so what's the MLB like? How
it's a volleyball
sorry?
school now.
Like legit, they got a whole stadium. I was like, God damn.
they they bow down to
Um,
Creighton in basketball, and they give up that stadium for anybody in football.
what's the MLB like, and how did you get started in it?
Baseball is good. I initially got started in it after the COVID year in the NBA, and kind of needed to find a. My contract was up with the Pacers, and there wasn't another one for another 7 months. So I was like, I got to figure out how I'm going to pay my bills. So I started interviewing
Mm,
elsewhere, and then found the Washington Nationals, and that department there, and Gabe Torres and whatnot, really felt like home, and people I could trust and grow with. Uh, so that's
mm,
kind of why I chose them over some other organizations. Not to say those other organizations weren't reputable or had good people working there, but um, him and Shane Hill are real big reasons that I chose to come to the
mm.
Nationals. Um,
What was it that they done particularly that made you feel at home?
they they felt like they cared um, about me as a person, and were curious and an ability to get better at what they were doing, day in and day out,
Mm,
and were an easy group to be around and talk to, and further develop and grow. So can't say enough good things about those two.
yeah. What's your
As
day to
there,
day
but
look like? What's your day to day look like?
during the season depends on if we're on the road or at home. If we're at home, um, have players come in for either for treatments, and then lifts. Um, and then we have a lot of downtime. So in basketball, you probably do for 3 hours of work in 3 or 4 hours. And in baseball, you do about 3 or 4 hours of work and stretch that into 10 or 12 hours. So there's a lot of in between time of when you're doing stuff and getting stuff done. So um, depends on what players where in their schedule and during the
Mm,
week. So we play roughly 6 games a week in baseball. So it's a lot of games, and then trying to fit in and workload there for guys that are playing or that
mm,
are playing, or where the starting pitcher is in their cycle, and where relievers are. So being able to tinker and tailor loads and velocities and exposures based on the schedule for them.
yeah, that's something that I kind of wanted you to get into is because like you said, games are six times a week. How do you prepare athletes for that, and how do you keep them healthy and going throughout the whole season?
So if we think about baseball as a high work capacity demand for a whole day, just trying to keep that capacity high and have their chronic level up here, so you're not spiking really high or dipping too low.
Mm.
So being able to have the exposures of, hey, we need hamstrings per se, or running exposure at this velocity is what your max is. We need to have some exposure to that every week and every X amount of days. On, say, if we're working a 9-day rolling average of chronic workload ratios. Uh,
Yeah. Can you sort of explain what chronic
yeah,
load
so
is?
chronic workload would be the total workload that you're experienced over X amount of days, and the acute would be the average. I mean, see, the chronic is the average. The acute would be the spike that you might see, or
Mm.
the low dip. And that's a workload that you're exposed to. That being all the external and internal factors. Obviously, you can't really account for every external factor, and there's not really a great way to measure it. There's indirect ways, but um,
Mm.
the external workloads of measuring that, either GPS or tonnage, from workloads in the weight room, or just total distance covered in the outfield, or in on the field per se, um, or total swings, and all that encompassing into a whole workload. And then being able to take that ratio once you have enough data, or that metric once you have enough data, and analyze it into a figure of acute to chronic, the day, and then the
Mm.
over X amount of days of whatever you set your chronic to. So if you set it to 9, that'd be the chronic days, and then the acute would be that one day. And then you could set thresholds of ability, of if you go over threshold, and being able to tinker that however you guys see fit, per se. The ultimate goal is to keep the
Mm.
athlete on the field, and not overwork them or underwork them.
Just finding that
Yeah.
sweet spot. Yeah. So, what kind of metrics do you specifically look at during the week for these players?
For a while, I was looking at catapult data. Um,
Mm.
Hawkeye started measuring in-game data, so I can look at velocity exposures or running exposures. So top velocity is a big one. Being able to analyze if they're getting exposure, and how much of it, and then top speed, and then looking at some velocity-based training metrics to adjust certain in-game, or sorry, in-lift, uh,
Mm.
intra-session
Yeah.
lifting. And then I have the bilateral force plates from Vald, so looking at counter and
Mm.
adjusting from there, and kind of longitudinally tracking, and then day-to-day stuff,
That's actually one company that I kind
as
of
well.
recently got in.
And then
Sorry?
handheld dynamometers as well, but that's more so not a day-to-day thing. It's a benchmark, or point.
Yeah. That's actually the force plates is something that I've been recently getting into. We used them at my undergrad, and I just found it fascinating. Different type of sort of metrics that you can get out of it, and what do they mean?
Yeah.
How is it that you use with it with your athletes just
One
now?
of the bigger things that we look at is RSI mod. So um, RSI mod, and put into simple terms, is a ratio of input to output. So the time spent on the ground, generating force to jump, and then the height of the jump is more so that how you calculate that. The height of the jumps is really easy to measure, right? Versus the other one. So it's just jump height over contact time, or contraction
Mm.
time, excuse me. Um, so it's a big thing to quantify, and then adjust the either the day lift, or programming for that individual to be more explosive or more powerful, or whatever
Mm.
the limiting factor is for them.
What VBT device do you
We
use,
have Gym Aware. It's
Jim?
pretty standard,
Nice.
common one. It's pretty sport he
Are
is.
you majority looking at the Olympic lift during that, or are you looking at different sort of lifts?
Anything that I could use in terms of like a French contrast or post activation potentiation for the heavy lift gets used. Any of the like compound multi joint lifts that I have enough time to set up and use
Hmm.
um, are the main ones. Uh,
Do you usually go more single player in the weight room, or do you have everyone in together?
Depends on the day because of the weird constructs of time. So it's either trickle or all at once. Spring training, it's all at once. During the season, it's a couple players from each position group, or there'll be different set times. But ideally, if they can all come at once, but sometimes you have to do like a longitudinal rehab with somebody. I'm coming back from like a Tommy John
Mm,
or um, some short acute injury that they're being built back up. So it just really depends on what group. It's a little different than the college level where everyone's at it all at once for the most part. But
yeah. So how do you manage that sort of the different sort of time schedules of each player?
building an onus of themselves. So they're a professional. They're going to have to figure it out. I'm not necessarily there to babysit you. I'm there to help you be a
Mm,
better professional and better at your craft. And if you don't want to take that seriously, at some point that is on you because you're getting paid to play the
mm,
sport. And you're going to have to figure out what motivates you. I can help you find that along the way, but then the day it's ultimately on you. So that's how you figure that
100%.
out. Sometimes in the
How
past,
much?
fines work, but that's not necessarily a end all be all solution. And as CBAs and whatnot change, that's a little different.
Yeah. How do you split the times between gym work and field work?
Um, in general, we have guys lift position players somewhere around 2 to 3 times a week, and then pitchers it's variable, but it really depends on what I'm trying to accomplish. It's a lot of microdosing of certain things, for lack of a
Mm,
better term. So needing to elicit certain little changes of movement prep or stuff integrated into that is how you can break it up as well. But there's not distinctly a set breakdown of we're only doing this
yeah.
because at the end of the day they're there to play baseball.
Yeah. So is there a higher emphasis on them just playing their sport as opposed to building up these speed and agility requirements?
Yes, yeah, for the most part. I mean, that's the main thing. But with that being said, is not everyone's getting those exposures because you could go 0 for 4 3 days in a row, and then you're not sprinting at all during the game, especially if you punch
Mm,
out majority of those. Um, so it really depends on the programming. Depends on what the game is providing.
yeah. What kind of philosophies do you use apply during the program building phase?
Uh, like in terms of if we use VBT or what have
Um, uh, you kind of mentioned French contrast. Is that something that
yeah.
you do? Do you go
I always
into?
struggle with this question because I don't like to deal in any absolutes. It kind of drives me nuts. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to get the individual to move well and interact with the environment.
Mm,
So being able to find what is limiting them from doing that at the highest level and working back and using whatever tool or whatever method that elicits that their ability to interact and move within the environment. Sounds cliche. I'm not trying to build bodybuilders or power lifters, but if that person needs X, Y, and Z that falls under bodybuilding or powerlifting, we might use that. So that's
mm,
my philosophy of using all tools at my disposal, and not trying to rule out any one method, but being able to have that individual move well within their environment and then hit all the things that help stabilize, make them mobile, and make them strong within various planes.
mm.
That's
So you're more of a principle type, where it's just like you pick things that work best for that individual sort of
Yeah,
situation. Yeah. No, I think that's like the best thing you can do, because each sort of philosophy of training has good and bad parts
yeah,
about it. So it's like trying to pick these like little gems that each provide, and how can you build up this whole program based on a solid movement based sort of approach. Because like at the end of the day, like we're not sports coaches. We're not going to get them to swing better. We're there to build everything else around it so that they have the capacity to do that.
yeah. And I mean, even at the pro level, depending on your integration with your team and how well you know the sport or do certain stuff within the sport, whether it's basketball or baseball, you might actually do that, and be able to break
Mm.
down the swing mechanics of here's where you're not getting on plane. Here's
Okay.
where I can take that from their movement capacity. Now that you can be a little bit better on plane from a movement perspective, that doesn't mean pitch selection or
Mm.
why you're swinging at a slider in the other box, or pitches in the dirt. That's a little bit different. But from the movement and biomechanics side, those are things you definitely can work on and develop. Um, and then as
Yeah.
well in basketball, when I was working in the NBA, because I played basketball growing up, you'd end up practicing with rehabs and long term rehab players, or getting thrown into other practices. Um, and if it's in a one on one rehab type setting, playing is part of it. And so knowing what makes them good at that, and helping refine that portion. So being able to break down and actually watch it with your eyes
Mm.
rather than just data on a data set.
So how important for you was being an athlete at a high level, now getting to coach at a high level?
I think it goes back to that your question prior of help building relationships, because you kind of know what some of the stuff they've gone through. Granted, it's not in baseball, it's not in the same sport, but in a different
Mm.
avenue of trying to achieve a high athletic goal. So it helps find common ground and understand certain nuances, and still in baseball being athletic relative to the players you're around too,
Mm.
which is always nice.
Yeah. What's some of the sort of mistakes that you've made that you wish you could go back and do something different?
Oh man, I mean, there's always a learning opportunity from those. Um, yeah.
It's a loaded question.
So I mean, sometimes you wish you would have known more, in trying to
Mm.
help players be more robust, and not be so exposed to potential risk factors. Um, Sometimes I think if I went back, I would have. I hate to say like appreciate it more, because I definitely tried to appreciate it
Mm.
while I was going through it. But some of the like times you're going through the lower levels and you're not making as much money and you're doing it for experience, enjoying that even though it's a struggle. Um, there's probably just change of perspective. I think with one of the
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a mistake, but lack of foresight and being hyper focused and
Mm.
excited to get to the next level. Not to say that didn't mean where your feet weren't where you were at that time, but um, being
Being
yeah,
present
a
in the
little bit
moment.
more in terms of the grand presence of the moment. Not to say it wasn't dialed in and diligent at the moment, but
Yeah. What's one coach that sort of shaped your way of coaching and how you present yourself in the weight room?
um, I've thought about this a lot. I don't think I can have just one.
Hey, shout them all out.
Um, there's a guy named Dennis Kiley or DK that shaped like how I was in high school. He helped formulate um, a lot of the beginnings for me, as well as my high school group was close with Coach Radcliffe at Oregon. And so some of his presence,
Mm.
and then seeing him when I was at Oregon coaching, um, or him coaching the athletes and whatnot around me as well, um, helped formulate the presence I kind of seem to carry, of not being ultra rah. I'm not a big, like, not a college football strength coach where I'm going to go butt heads with people wearing helmets. Um, Coach Mark Davis at Oregon helped kind of further that as well. And then some of the ones in the Olympic development pipeline, and then getting to work under Jim Crumpos and that staff there, helped formulate some of the approach that I took to group setting,
Mm.
and then working with Sean Wendell and Andy in Indiana uh, helped as well. Those kind of all formulated, and I know I'm missing a lot, but if I if I forgot to mention some, I'm sorry.
What was like the biggest lesson that you've learned going through all these sort of experiences and coachings?
Be adaptable. Um, that's probably the biggest thing. Know that you can learn from anywhere, and education doesn't necessarily need to be formal. There's a lot of avenues to learn, but as long as you can have somewhat level of discernment of at least knowing where to go ask experts of where they find their research, and how they've applied it, for some evidence-based practice, and then being able to go look at other people, whether that's in certain disciplines of somebody that's an expert in those fields, of being able to know questions to go ask
Mm.
them, or where to find them, or who to look at. So whether that's in tech, in tendinopathies, and force plates, and manual therapy, what have you, coaching strategies. Um,
Mm. How would you recommend sort of new coaches approach these sort of professionals in their chosen
in
field?
terms of how to interact with them if they can. One thing that was said to me at one point, I think Sean Wendell told me, he's like, don't ever ask a question that you can go Google yourself. Uh, no,
Mm.
that's a blanket statement, but if you want to get the coach's attention or practitioner's attention of with a question, or you're emailing with a question, have it be something that you can't necessarily go get the first three hits on Google.
100%. That takes me back to so when I started looking into coming into this industry, I think it must have been 2017, 2016, 2017. I shot Bart Bartholomew a message, which he's wrote Conscious Coaching, he's wrote other books as well. But I just like on the off chance, I just shot him a DM, and like it was just a simple question of, this is where I'm at. Where do you think, like in my path, I could get to this specific area? And he's like I can't tell you what to do, but my progression was this, and he sort of broke down his progression. So it's exactly what you're saying. It's like a question that's tailored to a where that specific coach has came from and his experience, and make it specific enough that he might be able to, like, you won't be able to Google it
Yeah,
anywhere.
I think that's great. Um, I forgot I was going to say something, but I was too caught up with that great answer.
Thank you. Nah, but it's like it's just like being able to reach out and just, and I think like a lot of S&C coaches are willing to reply, and they will spend some time. There's some that won't, but then that's more on them and not on you. And I think you just have to sort of pick.
Which is funny because if you see that person arguing with somebody on Twitter, they definitely have enough time to give you advice rather than trying to self-serve themselves by proving they know what the hell they're talking about on Twitter for arbitrary victories. Uh, the other thing I was going to say was knowing to taking opportunities as they come to. Um,
Mm.
Sometimes you get young professionals of like strictly chasing a logo, which isn't a bad thing. Chasing a logo is fine. But at the same time, knowing that like these other opportunities that might not have a logo will help you get to that spot. So being able to peel that back and do some of those other littler jobs per se, and trying to peel back of the why of you're doing what you're doing rather than the
100%.
where or what.
I think one of the best examples I can think of for that is like I was on a call with a coach and he was essentially like, you might be saying yes to one, but you're having to say no to others. And that sort of speaks about like you might be chasing that logo, but you could have actually probably learned more and had more contact time with athletes, had more one-to-one interactions with head coaches, like other professionals in the industry by taking a less desirable position.
And the less desirable one also might have paid you more.
Exactly. But I think this is what I find fascinating about the lack of knowledge on this industry is like people don't realize how much unpaid work you have to do to get to some of these
Yeah.
positions.
Or you got to get creative to make the paid work, do a couple things or have different backgrounds.
100%. I did want to ask a MLB question specifically because I watched a game on
Nationals game?
TV. I think yeah, I think it was a
Oh, man.
Mariners, and they were playing. Who were they playing?
Recently?
No, this was in
Oh.
2022. But it's not changed. What I'm about to ask has not changed. But it's the amount of adverts that it is.
The amount of advertisements? What
Yeah.
about,
Like just like commercial breaks, I think you would call it.
yeah. What about them?
Just why?
Because that,
I want to see the players play.
I mean, it generates revenue. That's probably the best justification I have for you is that makes the league money, which in turn makes everyone else money. Uh, it's because it's not like European soccer or soccer in general where
Mm,
you can just run ads around the field and it goes for 45 minutes a clip and then there's the intermission and then there's another 45 clip and then stoppage time. So you constantly get ads versus they do run ads at halftime, but there's just more
mm.
stoppage time in basketball, football, uh, baseball, hockey.
Yeah, that is something I was like, God damn, like I was like, it's because like we were, I think it was just after the 4th of July, so we were just around the TV, just like they were like, "Oh, do you want to come watch the Mariners?" I think, oh, who were they playing? It's a big rival.
The Astros.
Is it one called Captains or L something? Oh, this is gonna bug me. I can't remember. But like they were like, "Yeah, that sounds fun." So I went.
Oh, you
And
were
like
at the game.
no, I was watching it on TV. Like we all gathered around and we were just watching it. And like every 5 seconds was a different commercial. And I was like, "Is this going to be like this the whole game?" And they're like, "Yep." I was like, "God damn it!" And those games are
Yeah.
long.
Now that we have the pitch clock, makes the game go a little bit faster.
Ooh, can you explain that?
So the pitch clock is it's a clock, and it times the pitcher from the time you deliver the ball down the mound. So the time it resets, the time you get the ball back, you have till you can pitch it again. If the pitcher
Ah,
fails to pitch within that time, it's an automatic ball call on the count. And then if it fails to get
right.
ready by a certain time, it's automatic strike call. It has increased the game significantly. I want to say shaving down around 30 to 40 minutes average per game, roughly.
Damn.
But with a caveat, if you want to bring it back to strength and conditioning, work capacity, it kind of changed the amount of workload over time that pitcher is going to have to
Mm,
do in terms of um, their work capacity to do the same amount of pitches in a less amount of time. Um, and I want to
mm,
say one of the pitchers from the Blue Jays this year. They tested the pitch clock in minor leagues, and this is the first year it's in major leagues or this past season, and he had one of the lowest ERAs in all of baseball. And then this year, he vastly struggled. Now, that's definitely multifactorial, and there's a lot of things that went in there. But one of the key differences is the pace that he was playing at.
Mm.
There's other factors into it, but there's an interesting anecdote in terms of the work capacity and pace.
Yeah. So what kind of things have you done differently to keep up with these demands?
Um, the work to rest ratio is big for those pitchers, but that's generally trying to have them have a good general line base level of fitness to begin with. If
Mm.
you're over fat and out of shape, um, and you come into spring training out of shape, that doesn't play well to begin with. You might have been able to survive on it before because that wasn't, you could pitch 100 miles an hour or locate really well or command your one pitch tremendously. But if that's now you're going to be a huge limiting factor, it's going to be prevalent.
Mm. There's, yeah, I think with the because I'm guessing the pitchers don't have to run a lot during these games.
Uh, Not ideally.
No,
You're
yeah.
gonna
So it's not like they're just having to keep up with the demands of throwing
yeah,
over and over. Yeah.
but if you have to do that for a long time, still that's still a good amount of workload. But you still run to cover
Mm.
bases and whatnot, but you're not running like a center fielder might,
Yeah.
and you don't hit
No, that makes
anymore as
sense.
a pitcher.
Yeah. What kind of advice would you give a new SSC coach coming into the industry?
Seek out advice and seek out high level professionals of in varying fields that kind of incorporate all the things you're looking at. Like I was saying before, with the tech or coaching styles or um, therapies or what have you. And then
Mm.
once you do make it to that level, not being afraid to give back or help the next person in line. Um,
Mm. Who's one coach that you've sort of reached out and they were very generous with their time and sort of helped you as much as they could? Or do we go back to those coaches that you mentioned before?
um, a guy named Harry Mara coached Ashton Eaton, and when I was at Oregon, he was around a lot during some of the training slots I had, and he could have blown me off at the time because he's coaching the world's greatest athlete. But him talking to me and giving me little bits of advice, I thought was helpful. Doubt he'll remember
Mm.
that interaction, or if he ever hears about it, he won't probably remember. But I definitely do. In terms of reaching out, I think the athletic trainer at UCLA was with the Hornets and the Cavs before that. Tyler Lesher. Originally, I reached out to spit ideas off of him and ask him questions, and now we've kind of built a good friendship with him being at UCLA and me living here and us enjoying other things in life outside of
Mm.
this realm of work. Um, I'll be grateful for that one.
How important is that for you having something outside of sort of S&C and coaching?
Well, as you said before, alluded to before, the colorful background and convoluted background, I have a lot of interests outside of this. So I like a lot of different things. I'm curious. I think that's probably the main crux is just curious about the complexities of life. So I like to travel. Actually traveling here the next 60 days or so in December. However many days away from that is now. Um, like cars, working with my hands, building things, art,
Nice.
movies, craft coffee, craft cocktails.
Ooh,
I like
that craft
so
coffee.
yeah. There's a wide array of things. Golf.
Nice. The only person I play golf with is my brother, and that's because me and him talk shit the whole course. We went out a couple days ago, it was wet and it was like sludgy, and they were like, yeah. I was like, bro, what have you got me into? And he's like, yeah, it's going to get drier. It's going to get drier. I promise. We get to like the fifth hole. It's like worsening, and I'm just like, it's going to get better, is it?
Yeah. I
That
grew up
was
in
some of the
Oregon,
more
so I
tame
know
days.
that rain, sludge, nasty weather that comes in the winter.
Hmm.
But yeah,
How was that? How was Oregon for you?
the state or the school.
The school.
I loved it. I'm a duck through and through. I got my master's from Georgetown. It doesn't quite. It's not. It's not home. It's not where I played sports. My dad played football there, so it was a family type thing. Um, it just I'm a duck. None of that Washington Husky. Go Ducks.
Good dogs. I had
Our
Nima in
facilities are better.
Thailand.
We
Facilities
had
are better.
Italian marble in the showers. We were the first to really do sports med complex like we did.
Mm.
Uh, they put it in as I was leaving. The weight room has the hardest hardwood in the world in the platforms. I'm sounding like a pitch man.
But like the thing that I've
I'm
been
in the
speaking
damn
about, and
athletic Hall of Fame and at the University of Arizona, and I'm pitching Oregon here.
I watched the video where they were like having a walk through their football facility, and I was like, God damn it! Like that is next level. Like I'm a dog, but
Our
like
basketball arena was nice.
I'll I'll give that to them.
Our floor is a little. I loved our floor, but one of my friends that was with the Pacers, he seemed to hate it because he got an over back call when he was playing us there. That's what you get, my guy. Deep in the trees, deep in the woods.
What was your like favorite sporting moment at Oregon and Arizona?
At Arizona or at Oregon?
Both.
Trying to think of one at Arizona. Um, some of the teams I worked with made the College World Series of baseball and softball, so that was cool. Um, the women's I didn't really work with women's golf that much. I helped out every now and then, but they won a national title, but I really helped them at all during that. But those are some cooler moments. Um, basketball being the tournament. The tournament's always cool.
Yeah. Now, like I said at the start, like your like I would say resume, but like I think your whole sporting career and then what you've done now is just like there's so much in it that I'm just like how how do you go from here to there to then there, and just like how do you get involved with all of these teams and
I
performances?
think just being able to take opportunities as they come and realize that they can help you develop is kind of how I got to some of these, and not being afraid to jump when there's a
Mm.
chance. That's kind of how I got to do a lot of these things. And then I think being exposed to a lot of those backgrounds helped me further develop movement
Mm.
competencies in individuals because it understands movement at a holistic level rather than just for one sport. So knowing certain rotational movement patterns with implements or constraints or linear or vertical movement patterns and how those kind of all integrate and where they apply to different portions of different sports. So that,
Yeah. Can you break down the rotational sort of movements that you go through and how you teach competency in them?
so one of the big things of baseball is it being very predominantly rotational based for the majority of the movements that most people think of in baseball. So throwing,
Mm.
pitching, and hitting being the big ones, and even stealing bases, so turning and opening up. But breaking it down for the individual and how it will be most effective for them to do what they do. Like there's a lot of similar characteristics in what makes someone throw really fast or throw hard based on certain aspects. So seeing how the footer interacts with the ground, here, how their tilt is, how their arm slot is, and how that sequencing will elicit a certain motion if that's putting too much stress on the elbow, or if it's accomplishing the task that we're trying to accomplish in terms of what pitch is working for them, or what makes this person good at this pitch or at this tunneling. Um,
Mm.
so there's other players you can draw from that have been successful at certain pitching styles that help further develop the person you're trying to develop. But then there's other players you can't ever look at because they're an anomaly. You're like, how the hell does that
Mm.
person throw 100? Or how does that person hit well? Um, so being
It's like the
yeah.
outliers.
So if that does that kind of answer the rotational aspect, or do you
Yeah.
a little bit more
Yeah.
depth on C?
No, so I've been getting fascinated with the rotational work and how. So I know it's from the ground up. It's all ankle to then throw, but I've been sort of wondering how to strengthen that side while not letting the essential stabilizing side close up and be sort of weak, and how that sort of gets developed in these sort of elite level
Talking about like
sports.
the contralateral side or the ipsilateral side coming
Mm.
through. Um, to be fair, most most high level athletes are going to have some form of uh, asymmetry. So you're going to have that, but you're going to try to bias the other side when you can to not be so asymmetrical to one side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So like you're trying to contract the longer side and sort of vice versa.
Yeah, you're just trying to develop it to be robust as well.
Mm.
Um, but you do a lot of eccentrics at varying velocities. For some reason, there's a misnomenclature going on. Maybe not for everyone, but in the standard practice or physical therapy realm, or general level of strength and conditioning, that assumes eccentric is a slow tempo, 4 second, whatever. Eccentric could be at a really high velocity going into a negative direction to slow the thing down. Which, if you're looking at baseball,
Mm.
throwing something and hitting something, you're definitely having an eccentric contraction or eccentric portion of a movement at a high velocity to stop yourself from going said direction, and to make the motion that you're doing fluid. So
Mm.
you should probably train those so they're in the plane or pattern that you're trying to make effective. So that's a big thing
Mm.
of finding ways of constraints and constraint led approach to have that motor programming of each and every day or session turn into a motor learning of the neural pathway to develop that
Mm-hmm.
hitting pattern or throwing pattern or rotational pattern.
100%. Have you had any chances to look at the K box?
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah. What's
well,
your thoughts?
one of my, I think it's the K box. One of my good buddies down in Miami as well, or Miami Lake, said he uses it in his facility. But I like it. It's good. There's a weird lag on it sometimes, but I like the inertial unit.
Yeah.
Um, I like. There's another company. They should probably give me a little tidbit if they ever hear it. But Kabuki Strength, it's from the Pacific Northwest. They developed something that's very similar, and it's cheaper, I believe. And they have the one that it goes on the rack, and you get the pulley, and it does the same similar thing. I don't know if they sell it yet, but they definitely have it. Uh,
Is it
Mad
this one?
scientist himself. No, that's the transformer bar that basically allows you to put the weight in any vector that elicits a front squat or a back squat based on where the line of
Yeah.
gravity and force go with that.
Trying to see. What if any? Or what's your thoughts on fascia
Fashion training.
and training fascia? Yeah.
So that's funny. I was prepping a post about fascial slings actually today. Uh,
Oh, let's go.
uh, Big on it as well for it being a tool in the toolbox of understanding how people move through space. One of
Mm,
the big things I think with that, there's a couple understandings of it. One being that's probably the first. It is one of the first things that gets restricted in movement when you have a dehydrated individual, because of the ability for it to harness and store water. It is definitely a thing that gets restricted per se, for lack of a better scientific description, uh, with dehydration. That being said, that can compound on itself and make more restrictions with in movement. So as you start to train some of these slings and fascial lines, they'll become better at movement through those ranges that you're either shoving it through at the beginning or forcing it through and then loading it through in various velocities and loading parameters.
mm. So, what's your sort of take on loading fascia, and how would you go about doing it?
Um, Being able to load it in different vectors with different types of tools. So um, bands are great at it, kettlebells, things that are free loading, water bags, use a lot of water bags. And
Mm,
with that being said, the water bags add another element or another level of perturbations or varying combination and resistance. So being able to integrate more proprioception along with getting into certain fascial slings and fascial movements are big.
that's something I've sort of wanted to try, but I've not gotten the chance to. Is the water bags? What sort of results have you seen by using them?
Um, Better neural pathways to achieve tasks. So being able to write and correct tasks to get the same desired outcome. Uh, because if
Mm,
you look at a motor learning standpoint of a principle, you often can take a different initial path to get the desired result. I think one of the age-old ones of in every textbook for the last 60 to 100 years is the hammer, where they
mm,
saw the blacksmith swinging the hammer and they draw the pathway. Well, his arm swing, if it's increased degrees of freedom, has a they had varying different paths. He got to hitting the same nail or same piece of metal over and over again, and that kind of goes to this principle of what we're saying. So adding those perturbations in is kind of changing where you're getting feedback and where you need to adjust to achieve the same outcome or
mm.
get to the same arm slot tunneling point at a more manner
Yeah,
or hitting or shooting.
yeah. For people who don't quite know what a water bag is and how it sort of functions, how would you break it down?
Uh, so think of a med ball or a tube filled with air. It's like a balloon. So they have a ball aspect, has a handles, and it's filled with water and air. So it's not you can make it heavy, but it's tremendous. It's not tremendously heavy, but it is based on similar to what you're showing with the flywheel of inertia. So you're throwing an object in a given direction or moving it in a given direction. Well, just like um, Newton's laws say that water's still moving. Once you stop
Mm,
it, that water's still moving until it hits the other force of the side of the ball, and then it's going to have some slosh effect. So it's going to throw and provide different feedback, and they make them in ball forms, tube forms, and you can add different resistance. It's just another tool in the tool bag of abilities to use
mm.
stuff to make a more robust athlete.
Yeah, it's sort of working on those stabilizing muscles and how engaging they can get and stabilize as quickly as possible. It's kind of like the bamboo
Yeah,
barbell, well, bamboo bar, which I've sort of learned to love because like there's different ways you can load it. There's different ways you can make it harder for yourself to lift. Like the weight can be simple, it can be light, but the way that the bands or sort of the bamboo flexes can alter your squat and put you in sort of weaker positions to then strengthen them.
Yeah, I agree. I think if we go back to some of the stuff with the off season guys as well, is some of those people skip the step because of our bag stuff and
Mm.
this stuff is more sexy on Instagram and it sells better, and they skip the base building fundamental movement patterns. How can we make this individual stronger or have this general base of fitness, and then try to go to some of these stuff that's more refinement rather than in the base, because it's you can't
It's a
shoot a
funnel
cannon out
approach.
of a canoe,
Mm.
and conversely, you can't shoot a BB gun off an aircraft carrier. So you need both developments.
It is like a funnel type deal. Like you have to start wide and basic, and then refine it as you get into like more specific type work. And like I'm a big believer of stripping it right back to sort of the movements that you do as a baby, like bridging up on your neck, sort of rolling over without using your hands, standing up without using your hands, crawling, rolling forward, rolling backwards. Like I think
Yeah,
that's
I have a lot of rolling and crawling programmed into a lot of stuff that we do. My wife hates it because I also program it for her. She's like wants to kick me every time I program frontward, backward crawls or types of rolls because it's not fun, I guess, while you're doing it, but definitely builds the trunk and core and ability to move in space. Um, Frankly, we
100%.
stop doing it at some point in our lives. Like you're saying, babies crawl and kids climb trees and have all these movement competencies that we kind of just stop doing. And then we exist in a linear forward, backward motion. And a lot of people just do bodybuilding and never are going to do a show, but go play kickball again and then
Hmm.
wonder why they break in half.
This is actually a very valid point, and it's something that I see quite a lot. So I do some work in like a public gym where you get every type of person coming in. There's this footballer that came in once, and he came in a moon boot. The couple of days beforehand, he was fine, but he does bodybuilding movements every single time he's in the gym, and I can tell you his workout. Comes in, does bench, then does some sort of like vertical push, then does pull, then does legs on a separate day. Just very much bodybuilding approach. And I asked him what happened to you, and he was like twisted my ankle, rolled over, then just gave way. I was like, I mean, training like a bodybuilder is not going to get you better for your sport. Hello,
Was that me?
you're back. I
Are you?
think so. Sure.
Hopefully that wasn't me. Sorry.
That's all good. I'll cut this part out anyways. It's fine. You're all good. Um, but no, it's just people thinking that they want to look good, they want to look a certain way, but then go and play a sport that's very
Yeah.
dynamic, very movement based.
And then just it's the old adage of sorry.
That's all good.
Uh yeah, the old adage of them just trying to look good and then try to move and then realize that they didn't train or do any of these things. So when they start to do it, there's no base for it.
100%. And then he was like, what should I do? And I was like, it's going to be a long process, but we can build it. Suppose build it from here, but it's going to be a long, tedious process. And he was like, I'll do anything really.
Start training like an athlete again.
100%. I always think that's the best way to do it. It's like you train like an athlete, and then you just build it from there. Because you can still get shredded if you train like an athlete. You just have to look at sort of calories and what you're eating. Hello, we had a little bit technical difficulties, but we're back now. Um, we spent a couple minutes trying to figure what was happening out. We're back. We were just talking about growth mindsets and how important that is for strength coaches. What was your sort of pivot moment where you were like, this is the let's go?
Just being comfortable with being uncomfortable and realizing that some of these uncomfortable moments help you grow, and kind of inviting
Mm.
them in and learning from them. So when you take that approach, the uncomfortable moments aren't really uncomfortable anymore. Um, like I think we were talking about before of being uncomfortable in front of camera, but understanding and peeling
Mm.
back the layers of what is developing from it and being on camera and being able to connect and talk and learn, and grow. That strips away
100%.
the uncomfortableness of being on camera, and just being comfortable in your own skin.
I think at some point you sort of forget that it's there
Yeah.
anyways. But it's just like getting to that point where you're just like uncomfortable, 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 and then you get comfortable. But then you have to chase that next. Like, what's that next thing that's going to make me feel uncomfortable?
Yeah. And maybe the camera portion too is like how much formal education is just on camera anyways. It kind of feels
Mm.
like the same thing.
100%. I've told this story on the podcast before, but prior to being a strength coach, like I was a stutterer. Like if I got nervous or anxious in any way, shape, or form, like a stutter would come out, and I'd like get stuck on words. Like I did this public speech once where I was like presenting an award to someone, and like I just froze. Like I said maybe two words in the wrong order. And I was like, nah. Like when I started coaching, that's when I had to develop like this voice and this like not persona, but like it was always me, but it was just like this confident me and being able to coach and speak to people in a large group
Yeah.
setting.
I relate to that too. Even now, I still stumble over my words and figure I just got to keep going. I think early
100%.
in my career, I'm generally a quiet person by nature, I suppose. I'm not afraid to talk, but uh, in general, I try to be calculated with what I try to say, even if
Mm.
that's not always true. Attempts there, but early in my career, uh, I there was like a knock that I didn't project myself as well, so I tried to work on that, growing that and being projecting myself forward and maybe not be bullied or uh, be afraid of just saying what needs to be said. Uh, Growth,
100%.
so I can relate to what you're saying.
The thing as well is like as strength coaches, we're often having to be pulled in so many different directions that you kind of just have to like learn not to take these things as like strict. You kind of have to be a little bit fluid with some of the things that you're sort of being exposed to and how you deal with situations. You kind of have to take a step back, take a breath, and like, okay, let's think logically and how we can overcome this problem.
Yeah, be adaptable to any situation that's coming
Yeah.
along.
What was the program that sort of drilled into you that you have to be sort of down with anything that happens?
Uh, I don't know necessarily if it was a program, but
I mean, like, as in like facility or sport or sort of atmosphere.
uh, probably the NBA. There's so
Mm.
much changing dynamic. Um, Stuff changes.
Do you have any examples?
I mean, it's an 82 game season in the regular season, and then if you're working with guys in the G League or you're working with the G League team, that's more chaos to deal with, and stuff changes dramatically with travel, um, and
Mm.
going across places, player movements, um, some players traded, released, signed players, um, this chaos you got to deal with. So being able to adjust to anything that comes your way, and just solve the problem that's in front of you. Um,
Did you ever feel that you had to control these aspects? And when did you learn that these things aren't controlled and you can just have to sort of go with it?
I mean, some things you control what you can control, and then you go with the rest and try to make the best outcome of what hand you're dealt for the day or week, month, year, etc., and go from there. Um, there's sometimes you're not always in control, so just being able to
Mm.
adjust with what you can control. Um, you can't always control how the refs do things in the game. So in the game aspect, being able to go with that and adjust to what's going on there. Does that kind of make sense of just the
Yeah,
situation?
yeah. No, like I
Well,
obviously like as coaches, we're not always in control of what happens. So it's essentially trying to get the message out there that we can't control everything, but what we can control, we can sort of deal with it. What we can't, then we kind of just have to roll with the punches and be adaptable
yeah,
to it.
you just got to keep rolling with the punches, punch back when you can at the goal, and keep fighting. Um, it's just simple but effective way to go about
Mm,
it. And I don't necessarily think that the NBA made me that way versus working in different aspects of my life and having to be in different the neurology clinic or exos or chasing the Olympic dream of trying to balance all those things, getting at multiple degrees or what have you. Um, Being able to figure out how to navigate all that at once
mm.
just kind of gives you the trial that you need to figure out how to do things.
That's actually a good point that you've sort of brought up was the different sort of accreditations and things that you've been a part of. If you don't mind, I'm going to pull up your LinkedIn just now because it exhibits that perfectly. Can you describe what each accreditation is and how you came across them?
Yeah, so the first, you're talking about behind my name.
Yeah.
The first one's my master's from Georgetown. The second one is the registered strength and conditioning coach from the NSCA, and the second one is the same thing, but the registered demarcation means that you're, I think, the minimum of 2 years is the thing that you get of working in
Mm,
professional or collegiate sports. Uh, the XPS is the Exos Performance Specialist, um, and then the PES is the Performance Enhancement Specialist. And the APC is the a good community of professionals led by Ramsey, who's at Kansas now. He was at in Sacramento when I was with the Pacers. And now he's at Kansas, and he leads a great cohort of people to kind of bridge the gap and understand well the nuance in a structured educational format,
mm,
and then develops a community. And a lot of I think it's great for especially like ATCs, DPTs, and other practitioners that are either refreshing or have never been exposed to what the hell it means to program for athletes in a pro setting or college setting or a setting that the dynamic and you need to be adaptable and the dynamic changes all the time. Um,
mm,
so I don't think, from my understanding, a lot of DPT programs even talk about what appropriate programming looks like and how it changes on a chaos continuum, how certain
mm-hmm.
things change. You can't do everything by 2 by 10, period. I don't,
Yeah,
and then
100%.
you have to take evidence based practice of what literature says and apply it to how things might look for this individual and take what the best evidence practice is. But you have to understand the velocities of movement, the vectors of movement, and how that interacts with what that athlete needs to do and what makes them good. And I think that cohort of people helps bridge a little of that gap. It's a great community. Shout out that group.
Yeah, you've kind of touched up on two really good points, and it's the like I don't know what your university sort of program was like, but certainly in mine, we never got taught how to program for different sort of aspects and different modalities of training. We were sort of just told these are some exercises, these are some program sort of philosophies and based methods.
Yeah,
Go, and we were like, all right, but how do I apply them efficiently? But then you look at the research and you sort of have to think all these aspects are in a controlled environment. Like there's no variables that they haven't
yeah,
controlled. Whereas like when you're out in the field, a guy might be sick, what do you do then?
yeah,
A guy might come in with a niggle, what do you do then? Like a guy's 6'5" and he's trying to deadlift. Is that like a conventional deadlift? There's ways that
Yeah,
we
you
can
can
make
go
that deadlift
7'3".
exactly, but there's ways to balance that sort of height difference and limb length and sort of these different nuances that each an individual athlete can have and how you can program effectively for them.
Exactly. Because not everything's going to look like 1960s Russia programming, where a lot of that initially came out of, or sorry, Soviet Union at the time.
No, but it's crazy how a lot of coaches just take a one size fits all approach to every program, but then they don't think about these nuances between sports, athletes. I do a lot of research on female athletes and how the menstrual cycle can play a big role into their performance, and that's something that's not very looked at just now. It's just a one size fits all. A man, woman, everything's the same. Go and
And the
push.
female
But
triad
then,
is like, here's just a broad brush painted over, unless you're like,
hundred
going through
percent, 100%. No, thank you so much for coming on and sort of sharing your colorful experiences and sort of everything that you've done and your knowledge as
it.
well.
Thanks for letting me ramble for this.
Now, this is the thing. Is like coaches think that they're just rambling and just spewing verbal diarrhea, but like to me, this is the sickest part about this podcast. Is like I'm learning with every single coach that's on, so I'm going to let you talk as much as I like as you want, because like for me, I'm learning, and like for the viewers out there, I think they're getting a sort of insight into what makes a great S&C coach and how you can progress through these industries.
Hopefully, somebody got something valuable for it.
I
If
did.
they want to follow along, my Instagram will be available, and they can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you sort of want to plug and make sure that people either follow you on or message you with any
You can
questions
message me on
that
Instagram.
they
I
have?
try to be pretty responsive at time uh, when I can. Um, I'm on Twitter as well. It's just I am Brandon with two A's, but I don't post a whole lot on there as much. But LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. I have a website as well. BR Performance Collective, and the Be Resilient Health Collective as well. Um, the Health Collective website will be up soon, and that is um, more my wife's side of um, naturopathic medicine. So
Hmm,
if they need to do any health here in
nice.
America, she's your gal. Get your hormones right.
Hey, I might ask if she can come on the
She might.
podcast.
She got some good gems. They're necessarily
Nice.
they're
I'll.
training stuff, but her wheelhouse is in physiology and medicine. So
I think like to me like I don't just want to speak to trans coaches because like that'll get like essentially every coach has sort of that I've spoke to and that I like to speak to has a sort of very movement based approach to their programs and very individualized program approach. Like we all have our different nuances and ways of doing things, and I'll disagree with some aspects of their training and coaching, and they can disagree with some of mine. I'm 100% like I spoke to Sachin, and he was like, I love doing that with coaches because like we might disagree on like we might agree on 95% of the things, but we disagree on the five. But it's how we deal with that 5% difference between our
yeah,
views. That's what makes a great
I
conversation.
think the big thing with that, with what you're saying, is context. I might not know all the context of why you're doing X, Y, and Z in the weight room,
Mm,
um, but I'm as long as you're having a sound justification, and I'm not with that individual, I'm gonna have to take your word for it in terms of what I'm seeing. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Well, there is a little bit of area we could disagree on, but at least we can have a hopefully have a good
mm.
conversation about it, which isn't the case for everyone. Um,
Nope. There's a lot of egos.
I guess another word of advice for people working with high level athletes is don't do dumb shit. Like, like don't just do stuff because it's sexy.
Yeah.
Don't
I love the
don't get a
programs no
$200 million
sense.
athlete injured because you thought something was cool.
That's a quick fire way to lose
Ugh,
your job.
safe way.
No, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.